some of the challenges that these young people face
When they're on the streets, or
when they're, yeah, when they're on the streets?
yeah. So um, one issue that's really interesting that's come out of a lot of my research and also just a lot of my clinical work is the street is chosen as the better option than what they're coming from. So that's actually, I think, very, very significant that where they're coming from is just untenable any longer. And the streets actually become the better option, which is really problematic if we think that, like, the streets actually can offer something better than where they're coming from. The streets can be, I mean, there are some initial benefits to kind of living away from kind of the trauma that they've experienced. So one is obviously that they've left the trauma. Of course, a lot of the dynamics of working through the trauma is with them. They haven't escaped that. But at least the initial crisis can be there. There's distancing. The streets can be a supportive kind of community environment. We see that quite often, and usually at first. So young people tend to kind of connect with other folks that are going through similar experiences. There's a sense of looking out for one another. There's, brotherhoods and sisterhoods that form, and these kind of tribes, the language, tribal kind of dynamics have been highlighted in a lot of anthropological research. But what I've always found is that that's kind of fleeing. While it can be a safety net for initial kind of sanctuary, in the end, the streets are deeply exploitative. You're consistently in survival mode. You're always thinking where you're going to sleep tonight, where you're going to eat tonight. Dealing with all the weather conditions of being on the streets, dealing with the public and their, you know, can be some deep tensions and hostility with in civil society for being on the streets. There's a lot of boredom being on the streets as well, and a lot of abuse. We see time and time again young people being exploited sexually, physically, when they're living on the streets. So while it can be a repose for a brief instant, a lot of the clinical wisdom, as well as a lot of the great workers that are on in shelters, drop-ins, health clinics, always argue that we have to get young people moved out of the streets as quick as possible. So again, there's a lot of drug dynamics on the streets as well, a lot of violence, a lot of gang work, a lot of petty thievery that emerges on the streets, and then you also have if you're suffering with mental health issues, it just gets amplified. We see with the pandemic how amplified mental health and addiction dynamics got when you're on the streets. You just generally, and I've always argued the pandemic highlighted some of this stuff, but homelessness is a disaster way before the pandemic being a disaster. And yeah, you just see the amplification of stress, of strain, of mental health, of addiction dynamics to survive and cope.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The pandemic really did raise a number of issues that we already were aware of, but perhaps
Right.
made them more public, more visible.